Hi, this is just a quick video to show some behavior around the counter. So this is our loan request workflow that we developed during training, and I've added a few other tasks to it. The main one here is I entered this counter here, and essentially what it's designed to do is to count the number of times that this rework loop has been selected. So if the manager selects rework, comes down here, sets the status to rework required, increments the counter by 1, and then goes back into the workflow. And this way we can track how many times this loop is done. And we also have a notification here that if the counter is greater than 3, we send out a notification, which would be a typical use case. I also added these additional 2 milestones over here to show, can I reference the counter task before it fires? And the quick answer to that is no. Until the task fires, it doesn't exist and doesn't have a value. So when I run this the first time, you'll see that this counter equals 0. And here's the rule here. It just says when the count is equal to 0 from this counter task, fire this. You'll see that it doesn't actually fire the first time through because this counter task doesn't exist yet. And then I'll show some ways that you might want to handle this based on what your use case is. So I'll go ahead and run this request. I start this request, counter equals, I put this field on the form here too, and just have it pre-fill from that counter task. Right now, it's equal to nothing. It's null, it doesn't exist. So we don't see anything there. I submit this loan request and it should go to, manager for review. So I submit the loan request. It's gone to our manager. But if we look at our flow view here, you can see that this task didn't fire because counter doesn't equal 0 right now. Counter doesn't exist, so it doesn't fire here, and obviously neither would the counter is greater than 0. But now let's loop it around and see what happens. So I go back to the manager review. I indicate that rework is required and submit. You can see that. Well, let's make sure we know where we're at here. We're back at this form, right? The counter task is fired, so it would be 1 now. And we can see that on our form when it pre-fills, counter equals 1. And now I'll submit this again to the manager. Go to our flow view here, and we can see that we're here for the second time. Now this task fires because counter is greater than 0. It exists now, so it can read that value from the counter, and it evaluates for this routing branch here. So the question is then, how would I get this to fire? Really, the only way to do that is to include this counter and get it fired before this actually starts looping here. So let me just let me go back to our actual workflow here. And the way we would handle that is, instead of going straight from the loan request started to enter loan information, we would do this. We would actually have the loan request started go directly to the counter. And let me just configure the rules here. I have to change this to an OR. Okay. And you would have to change this now because this counter is going to fire once before this manager review. So you'd want to make this like something like greater than 4, even though it's only looped 3 times. You can label it whatever you want, but you'd have to change the rule. But anyways, let's run it. We'll call this counter test 2. You can see that the counter in the first instance I run it now is equal to 1, right? Because it went to the counter and just bumped right back up here. And now when I submit the loan request, you can see our first time through, it does fire this task. Now it would never be equal to 0 in this case because as soon as it fires, it increments by 1. But hopefully you get the idea that if you want it to evaluate the first time through, you have to some way insert that into your flow before you start evaluating it.